Alright, folks. Time for another heaping helping of the show that could best be described as junk food. So let me be the one to eat this pile of nothing so that none of you have to put up with it. So, we begin where we left off, with the dream going completely insane. The statue is attacking everyone in the city who has nothing to do with the nightmare, and Blake figures that if they can get inside the statue can't get to them. Ruby volunteers and Yang is concerned about if she can do it, to which Blake says to believe in Ruby, and Ruby herself says that now isn't the time to treat her like a child. I'm sorry, but how is being worried about a plan the same thing as treating someone like a child? I would think that this would be the perfect opportunity to make sure that the person volunteering for the crazy plan can actually pull it off. But enough of me using sense and logic on shit writing, back to the paper-thin plot. Blake and Yang distract the statue, and Ruby slips inside. Meanwhile, the statue is returning the mini-Weisses to normal and dumping them back in prison. Weiss goes to the Jacques statue from earlier that got turned into a child, essentially, and turns it into an armored Grimm from episode 1. She helps round everyone up, including John. Before being sent back to prison, John calls Xion to ask for help. Xion explains that they changed the Grimm much too quickly, and now Weiss's heart is resisting the changes. The nightmare is taking advantage of this to spread even further. Back over to Team Ruby, they retrace their steps back to the theater from before, reusing animation to pad out the runtime. Then we cut back to John in prison, where the nightmare is able to spread throughout it. John thinks it may be because he took the knight from the tree thing, and to prove that point, the show cuts to where the red knight from before was, and that the area is covered with the nightmare's thorns. John tries to protect Pyrrha and the mini-Weisses before realizing that he can make a fast travel point and leave. For some reason, he gets all of them onto the train, and apparently the stupidly big ornate sword can keep the nightmare at bay. Yeah, it got stuck in the train last episode, but I didn't mention it because I had no idea it would be important. Then we cut back to Team Ruby, and John tries to call them, but there's interference. Where does it come from? I don't know. They seem to have perfect cell phone reception before. They get all the way back to the theater and start fighting the nightmare, but then Weiss shows up again and teleports all of them away. Except for Ruby, because she has super speed. Weiss also destroys the knight, meaning that they need another one to get back to the same spot yet again. Because Ruby and company can't make a plan more complicated than hit it again but harder this time, they just repeated the same plan from last time. And they're probably going to do it again unless the show decides to change that for some reason. Anyways, so Ruby gets found by John, who shows her the train, and they talk about what just happened. John guesses that the sword is stopping the nightmare from getting in because it's the immunity that Xion was talking about. Okay, sure, why not? Nothing makes sense around here, so we may as well pile more bullshit on top. And once again, John is whatever the writers need him to be. He says that once everyone in the prison was released, they were turned by the nightmare, and he thinks that they were not meant to be free in the first place. And Ruby asks why that would be, and John practically says what I was talking about last episode. Unchecked childish emotions does not a mature adult make. Ruby then goes on to regret everything she did in the last episode, calling herself selfish and saying that Team Ruby is a failure, all while saying how great Team Juniper is. At least Ruby reflecting on her actions is nice, but where does she get this idea that Team Juniper is better than her own team? Team Juniper hasn't had enough screen time to have problems, let alone fix them. Anyway, cut over to Blake and Yang, who got booted out of the city entirely and sent to a place where all the banished go, including all the faunus, of course. Blake says that this is the place where Weiss thinks she belongs, and we cut back to the white bitch herself. Pretty much everything is covered in vines and thorns of the nightmare, and Jacques has even started to break down for some reason. Klein reports that there is calm in the city, and that those who can be considered schnees may attain true sleep, which I guess means death. The glass coffin from before shows up, and the knight inside is destroyed by the nightmare. Then Ruby wakes up, and instead of giving a painful recap, I'm just gonna say that everyone shows up and starts clapping for her before turning into dolls in what is an extremely painful fake-out to end the episode on. Do I even need to say how I feel about this one? Write your own joke about how much this sucks in the comments. The only thing I could think of here is, why are we doing Inception bullshit in a series that does dreams so poorly that it should be a how-to guide on what not to do? Combine this with a scene that makes me think of the worst scene from Evangelion, and it makes me wonder what they were smoking when they were writing this. Or maybe that's the problem. They needed something to inspire them, and all they got was a paycheck and a cubicle farm. So enough about the shitty story, let's talk about the shitty characters. And that was the character section. No, I joke. There is one thing to talk about here, and that is Ruby's breakdown scene. It is nice to see her take a moment to reflect, but the issue is that it's less of a reflective moment and more of a pity party. Ruby doesn't get much pushback from John, and only time will tell if any of the lessons of this episode actually sink in. And if, lastly, the animation Well, I don't really have a whole lot to say here aside from, in some ways, it's gotten better. I can now tell what is going on more clearly in these fights and scenes in general, but the animation is still awkward and stilted. It's like every time they take one step forward, they take two back and hit their heads on something. And the talking head scenes are still boring and have all the life of a Barbie playset. Oh, yeah, and they reuse animation like this show had a shoestring budget. But let's be real, this had more than enough money behind it. The studio is just shit with only one good anime to their name. So, my final thoughts. I don't think I need to say anything else here because everything that needs to be said has been, and I won't even try to predict what happens next. If the writers wanted to subvert expectations or keep the audience guessing, then they've done a great job of that. Too bad that means there isn't a competent story being delivered. So a big thank you to everyone who made it through the video, and I wanted to say, you're all awesome. And I deeply appreciate each and every one of you. And if you want to see more content like this and want to see the channel grow, like and subscribe and follow the links in the description. This has been Veiled Shadow. Till next time.